His name was Daniel. He texted her every single morning for 61 days. Good morning. How did you sleep? Thinking of you. 61 days, without missing one. On day 62, he stopped, not because he was angry, not because something happened. He just stopped. By day 64, she had texted him 3 times after. 61 days of him chasing her, 2 days of silence did more than 2 months of effort. Today, I want to explain exactly why that happened. Not as a trick, not as a manipulation tactic, but as a window into how female psychology actually works and why most men are doing the complete opposite of what actually creates attraction. Stay with me, because what I am about to explain will change how you think about this entirely. Here is what most men believe. They believe that consistent communication is what keeps a woman's attention, that the more you show up, the more messages, the more check-ins, the more effort made visible, the more she will value your presence. This belief feels completely logical in almost every other area of life. Consistent input produces consistent output, effort is rewarded, presence is noticed, reliability builds trust. Think about your job for a second. If you show up every day, do the work, stay late when needed, you get recognized, you get promoted. Your consistency is your currency. Most men apply this exact same logic to women. They think, if I show up every day, respond fast, stay available, she will recognize that, she will value that, and that is the first place they go wrong. Because female psychology, specifically when it comes to attraction and desire, does not operate on that model. The logic that works in your professional life, in your friendships, in your family, that logic does not transfer here. And the men who apply it here do not get the result they expect. There is a distinction worth understanding between what the mind consciously processes and what the nervous system instinctively responds to. A woman can consciously tell herself that she does not care. She can say the words out loud, she can believe them in the moment, but her nervous system is running a completely different calculation. The nervous system does not respond to what is present. It responds to what has changed. There is a sound playing in this room right now, an air conditioner, a fan, traffic outside, something. You stopped hearing it approximately 30 seconds after you first arrived. Not because the sound stopped, because your brain classified it as constant, and constant things do not require attention. Now imagine that sound suddenly stops. You notice immediately, not because the silence is loud, because the pattern broke. That is exactly what happens inside her when you stop texting. When your texts were arriving regularly, her nervous system registered them as background noise, consistent, predictable, unremarkable. The brain does not expend energy on things that are stable. It conserves attention for things that shift. When the texts stop, the pattern breaks, and a broken pattern is by design what the brain is built to notice. This is not romantic. It is not flattering in the way men hope it will be. It is simply how the human nervous system processes absence. She does not decide to think about you. She does not choose to wonder what happened. Her brain does it automatically because that is what brains do when a pattern they had cataloged suddenly disappears. Marcus met her at a mutual friend's dinner. She was funny. She was smart. She seemed interested. He got her number. He texted her that night. She responded. He texted the next morning. She responded. Within 2 weeks, he was texting her every day. Good morning. How was your day? Good night. She kept responding, sometimes with energy, sometimes with one word, but she responded. Marcus took this as a green light. He increased his availability. He responded. Within minutes, he initiated longer conversations. He planned things to tell her throughout the day. What Marcus did not see was this. She had stopped thinking about him between conversations, because there were no gaps between conversations. He was always there, and things that are always there do not occupy the mind. This is the first error, and it is extremely common. The second error follows directly from the first. When she begins to pull back shorter responses, longer gaps, a general cooling, he accelerates. He texts more. He asks what is wrong. He becomes more visible at the exact moment that visibility is working against him. He pushes harder into a space that has already become oversaturated with his presence. And the harder he pushes, the more certain she becomes that whatever interest she had has faded, not because of who he is, but because of the dynamic he has created. Before I go further, I need to make one thing clear. What I am describing is not a tactic. It is not a strategy. It is not a technique designed to provoke a reaction. Men who approach it that way, who manufacture absence as a calculated move, produce a different result entirely, because the internal state behind the behavior is different, and women, consciously or not, register that difference. James read about this concept online, decided to try it. He deliberately ignored her texts for 3 days while checking his phone every 20 minutes to see if she had responded. She did eventually text. He waited another 4 hours to respond, even though he was sitting at home doing nothing. She picked up on something immediately. She could not name it, but she felt that his distance was performed rather than real. The silence had no weight because it was not backed by a life that was actually full. Compare that to David, who was genuinely buried in a project he cared about. He responded when he could, sometimes a Day passed, not because he was playing a game, because he was actually living. She felt the difference. She thought about him more. Same silence, completely different energy. What actually changes how your presence registers with her is not the silence itself. It is what the silence communicates about you. A man who is genuinely occupied with his work, with his goals, with his own internal life does not text constantly because he genuinely does not have the bandwidth to text constantly. His silence is not a performance. It is a reflection of where his attention actually lives. And that quality, that genuine investment in his own world is what changes everything. Let me walk you through exactly what happens in her mind when the silence starts. It is a Tuesday afternoon. She is at her desk. She has not thought about him since Sunday. Not because she dislikes him, because for the last 3 weeks, his texts have been so consistent that her brain filed them under background. Reliable, predictable, present. She picks up her phone, opens their conversation half out of habit. The last message is from Sunday. She puts the phone down, 20 minutes later. She picks it up again. Same conversation. Still Sunday. She is not dramatic about it. She does not spiral, but a quiet question forms without her choosing it. What changed? That question, automatic, uninvited, generated entirely by the interruption of a pattern, is more genuine attention than he received during 3 weeks of consistent contact. She does not immediately conclude that she wants him. That is not how this works, but she is now thinking about him. She is constructing explanations. She is, without intending to, paying attention, and attention is the first condition. For anything else to form, desire is not produced by availability. It is produced by uncertainty. This is not a controversial claim. It is a consistent finding across the psychology of attraction, documented across different cultures, different age groups, different relationship structures. The mind does not long for what it already possesses. It orients toward what it cannot fully calculate. Think about the last time you really wanted something. Not something you already had, something just out of reach. Maybe it was a job offer you were waiting to hear back on. Maybe it was a message you kept checking for. The wanting did not come from having it. It came from the gap between not knowing and knowing. That gap, that space between certainty and uncertainty, is where desire lives, and you cannot create that gap while filling it at the same time. When a woman can predict you completely, when she knows you are there, when she knows you will respond, when she knows your interest is constant and unconditional, the prediction itself removes the charge. Not because she has made a decision, because certainty by its nature does not generate longing. Longing is what happens in the space between certainty and not knowing, and that space only exists when you are not filling it. I want to leave you with something practical. The man who understands all of this does not celebrate it. He does not weaponize it. He simply stops making himself permanently available to someone who has not yet given him a reason to be. He redirects his attention toward his own life, not to provoke a response, but because his own life is where his attention belongs. Remember Daniel from the beginning of this video. On day 62, he did not stop texting her because he had read an article about female psychology. He stopped because he had finally started taking his own goals seriously. He had a project due. He had workouts to get back to. He had friendships he had been neglecting. He stopped texting her because he had somewhere else to put his energy, and that genuine shift in where his attention lived is what she felt, not the silence. The substance behind the silence. She texted him on day 64 because something in his energy had changed. He had become, quietly and without effort, someone with a life full enough that she was no longer at the center of it, and that made her want to be. Consider how many times you have been fully, consistently, generously present and received less in return than you expected. Consider whether the presence itself was part of the problem. Not your value, not your character, not your intentions, but the unconditioned availability you offered to someone who had not yet demonstrated that they would treat it with the weight it deserved. Female psychology does not reward effort that is given without cost. It responds to the perception of value, and value is communicated by what you are willing to withdraw, not as punishment, not as a game, but as an honest reflection of a man who understands that his attention is finite and that the woman who deserves consistent access to it has not yet been fully identified.